Welcome to Candler in Conversation, the podcast where Candler School of Theology faculty, staff, students, and alumni share their stories, their scholarship, and the theological questions that shape them. The show is proudly produced by the Candler Foundry, and I'm your host of the publications book series, Dr. Ebby Arnold. Hello, and welcome to Candler in Conversation, the podcast of Candler School of Theology at Emory University. Thank you for joining me today for our book talk. I'm Ebby Arnold, the scholar in residence at the Candler Foundry, and I have the pleasure of talking to author and my friend Dr. Jen Carlier about her new book, Finding God in the Basement, Reimagining a Theology of Addiction and Recovery. So, Jen, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Of course. I'm excited.
All right, so we have to ask a few preliminary questions just so the audience gets a general idea of who you are and really how reliable your thoughts are. So, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Oh, yeah. Oh, this is important.
It's very important.
I'm glad we're starting here.
It's very telling.
Yes. So I don't have a flavor. I do have a flavor. It's very specific. I like Tillamook. They do not sponsor me, but they might.
Oh.
I like Tillamook peanut butter chocolate ice cream.
Oh, that's my son's favorite.
Is it? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely
delicious.
Yeah. Okay.
And caloric.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the point with ice cream, right? If it's not caloric, don't trust it.
Don't bother, yeah.
There's this great place in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe where he says, don't trust anything that seems like it should be one thing but is another. And I feel like that
Fair.
low-calorie ice cream is one of those things I'm like,
no,
that's not trustworthy.
yeah, fair.
And where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a couple places. I grew up in the Netherlands. I was born in the Netherlands. I lived there until I was 10. And then my family moved to Taiwan when I was 10. And I lived there until I was 16. And then came back to the Netherlands and worked there for a while, worked in Norway for a little bit, and then came here to the United States.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You bring a whole lot of cultural memory from a lot of places with you.
Yeah.
Do you find that is something that comes out in your theology, that having been in lots of places and lived and, really settled in different places helps you look at things differently?
In some sense, I think one of the things that is maybe difficult about living in lots of places is you tend to be a little like rootless.
Oh.
And so in some sense, I think it's sometimes hard for me to figure out, like, where is home exactly? Is it, I mean, home is kind of here right now. Is it Taiwan, or is it the Netherlands? And so I think that might come out in my theology sometimes. But and I think we're like influenced by cultures in ways that we're not even aware of.
Oh,
So I'm sure
absolutely.
it comes out all the time in ways
Absolutely.
I'm not aware of.
So thinking about like this sort of trying to figure out what home is, it's interesting that your title is Finding God in the Basement, that it's associated, that there's a theological thought that's associated with a part of a building. And in your book, it's a church basement. It's not just the house basement, it's a church basement.
Yeah.
And it also talks about like how the church uses space. And what kind of theological messages those send. Can you tell us where does that title, Finding God in the Basement, come from?
Yeah. So for me, so I came to addiction recovery, about 15, 16 years ago. And so I started going to these meetings that meet often in the basements of churches. So I started going to 12-step meetings. I've been to some smart recovery meetings. And one of the things that I discovered in those basements was I had an experience of grace and love in a way that I had just never had in church. Even though, my parents were missionaries in Taiwan, I grew up in churches. I spent my whole
You're
life.
a theology professor?
Yes, that too. And yet I felt like I experienced God anew there in a way I just hadn't in the sanctuary. And so that's where that title comes from.
So what's different? I mean, obviously, besides just we've all been in church, most of us have been in church basements and know what that's like. What's the difference theologically that you have found between the basement and the sanctuary?
Maybe it's I think maybe theologically they're not that different, but it's more in practice, right? So churches talk a lot about God's love and grace. I grew up being inundated with this idea.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it wasn't until I went to the basement that I really experienced it.
Okay.
And so it's more the practice of grace, right? So so anyone who's ever been to a a basement community will know we spend most of our time sharing our stories with each other. And in that sharing, right, people will resonate with things that you share. I ended up just sharing a lot of things I felt shame about. Um, and I found, people would kind of nod. They would kind of say, like, oh, yeah, I had that experience too. And would keep offering back grace to me. And so, especially at the beginning when I relapsed just all the time, and I would come back in and be like, I relapsed again. I would keep getting this grace and love. And so for me, this was this really profound experience of like, oh, this is what God's grace is.
I love that you call that a practice. Um, because I think sometimes we tend to think of grace or the reception of God's grace or anyone else as, oh, this is when it happened this one time. But isn't even in non-addiction faith, like even if you're not struggling with addiction in that way, I think we overlook the fact that this is something that we ongoingly need to constantly return to, that it's not a one and done type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I write about this a little bit in the book about the fact that in some Christian circles, right, we talk a lot about a kind of story that you then assent to, and that's what it means to have faith. Or we talk about this once and done, like, oh, I accepted Jesus, and
I got saved.
yeah, I got saved. And I went to like missionary schools where I got saved all the time. Like,
Yeah.
I just
Well,
kept going back.
you don't want to take any chances.
No chances there. And so, one of the things that I think both actually in addiction and in recovery is really true is like we practice things, and
Mhm.
it's really in practicing that our lives change, right? So addiction is in many ways a practice.
Mhm.
You keep doing the thing, and you
Mhm.
keep practicing. So if whether it's drinking or something else, right? Every time you drink, it's a practice, and all the practices that go along with having an addiction of hiding and all these things. And recovery is similarly, I think, a practice. It's the
Mhm.
practice of, for me, it was, showing up to meetings, calling friends when I was struggling and wanting to use again. It's the practice of listening to people, the practice of offering back, saying like, yeah, I understand. And there's no shame in this. So I see that really as, I think in the basement, I really practiced
Mm.
grace in a way that I just hadn't in the sanctuary.
And I love that because using the term practice gets at the same thing where we would normally and often, unfortunately, use the word failure.
Hmm.
You know, but if it's practice, like we would never watch a baby learning to walk and saying, look, they keep falling, they're failing.
No,
Like
exactly.
they keep
Yeah, yeah,
falling down.
yeah.
This baby is a terrible walker. No, we
Yes.
all understand
Mhm.
they're practicing, they're learning.
Yeah.
And to be able to see this addiction and recovery as practice, we don't have to necessarily use the words failure.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, for
that
sure.
and I feel like that. So you take it in this direction where you say that there are better and worse ways of talking about God's grace and salvation, um, that help like facilitate this walk of faith that
Yeah.
is more practice. What are some of the better and worse ways we can talk about salvation and or grace?
I think other ways of thinking about it, so I write about the Exodus story as a really helpful way. What I love about the Exodus
Mhm.
story, I know I'm talking to a biblical scholar, so I'll be careful. Uh, but what I love about the Exodus story is it sees salvation as this long process
Yes.
and a really difficult and arduous process that
Mhm.
people are heavily involved in.
Mhm.
And that's really what I love about that. So if you read, right, Exodus, really by chapter 13, you're done. God has saved the Israelites. But then there's all these other chapters that are about like, what does it look like to live into that?
Mhm.
Um, and what does it look like to be people of freedom?
Yes. No, I love that. And I love that the emphasis of the Exodus is release from bondage,
Yes.
which you talk about. That is one of the ways of describing addiction
Yeah.
is bondage or slavery, something that has overpowered you that you can't alone. And I think this is part of the 12-step process, is recognizing that you can't do this by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So they often say something like, you alone can do it, right? So I can't make someone else recover, which is a helpful thing to know, because I
Mhm.
think often, people who have family members or people who are close to them who are suffering from addiction have this feeling of like, what must I do to make this person stop
Mhm.
doing this? You alone can do it, but you can't do it alone,
I love that.
right? You
Yeah.
you really need people to do it, and I think the Exodus story shows that too, right?
Mhm.
You alone can learn how to live into freedom, but you can't do it alone. There's a community that walks together and figures this out together.
What I really like about that is that it makes us start to recognize a truth that, when we look at the biblical text, both Old and New Testament, this is a communal covenant that God makes with people. There isn't just your individual faith and my
Mhm.
individual faith, and then we somehow find each other, come together, and make up a church.
Right.
But that God saved, rescued, redeemed, whatever, all of us. And therefore, I have this individual walk of faith, but it's derivative of us as a whole, which makes us responsible for those among us that are struggling with addiction or that are on the road to recovery or
Yep.
who are waffling back and forth.
Mhm.
This is an issue that affects the whole church. It's not an issue that only affects this one population, because we are a whole.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's definitely right. We are responsible for all of us.
Mhm.
And uh, what I love about it too is that uh, this is about addiction, but lots of people struggle with different kinds of brokenness.
Yeah.
And so addiction is one thing we should talk about and destigmatize, but I think
Mhm.
in doing so, we will destigmatize lots of other things that people are suffering from. Um, yeah.
So you mentioned that that's one of the practices, is that because in the basement you're sharing. If you're in a Methodist basement, it's cookies and punch.
Mhm.
It's whatever. But you're facing each other.
Yeah.
Whereas in the sanctuary, we're all facing this way and we're not looking at each other.
Yeah.
Um, but but that you say that just by being willing to be vulnerable myself, where we think that the best way to extend grace is to let the other person talk,
Yeah.
um, which is great because there's lots of people who just want to talk about themselves, but that this notion of sharing my vulnerability makes space for someone else to share theirs.
Yeah.
That is one of those practices of community, of
Yeah.
of how we do this and make space for each other.
Yeah, so often in meetings, not all meetings do this, but often in 12-step groups, if a newcomer comes, everyone shares their story first. Because we know, and I know, like the first time I went to the basement, I had no desire to say anything.
Mhm.
And I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know what they were like and if they were going to be judgmental. And so hearing all these people share their story, it wasn't until they shared their story that I could say, I don't know, like I belong here and I can share mine. And so I think that vulnerability is a kind of hospitality. It's an invitation to someone
Mhm.
else to also be open.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's easier to create a program for other people to share
Yes.
about their
But
program.
like you said, it really does, by saying, here's how you can offer hospitality. Like you said, I may not share my story of a drug addiction,
Hmm.
but I might be sharing some real crisis of mental health.
Yeah.
I might be sharing issues of abuse.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like you said, I love the fact that by focusing on one thing, we're not excluding everything. It actually is an invitation to just like you said, practice in this one area, and then see the effects that it has on the health of the whole rest of the church or the conversation or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so that the church truly becomes a community that walks alongside each other and not just an event that happens on Sunday morning.
Yeah. I also wonder, this is just
Hmm.
my thoughts. I wonder if this is also a particularly difficult thing in Protestant circles,
Huh.
because we don't have the practice of confession and forgiveness. Like it's very. I
Hmm.
think it's interesting. A friend of mine who's it's funny. She's Catholic and married to a Baptist minister.
Hmm.
They have a very interesting house. But she says, people always talk about like going to confession. She said, and yes, there is this need to unburden yourself, to tell someone, look, to admit to where you've done wrong. She goes, but that's also because of the equal need to hear someone else say, you're forgiven. It's okay.
Yeah.
You are still loved. Like you said, this experience of the basement really is a very similar type of confession and a reception of forgiveness.
Absolutely.
And so I wonder, do Protestants, do we struggle with this maybe even more because we don't have any other practice that's kind of equivalent?
Maybe. So I grew up in more conservative evangelical spaces. And one of the things that I sometimes miss about those spaces is that people were actually much better at talking about what was going on in their life and much better about talking about their faith. So I sometimes find in especially very progressive Protestant spaces, we're very comfortable talking about things like justice. We're comfortable broadly talking about theology. We have a much harder time talking about what's going on with ourselves and with each other. And so I think it's not just Protestant spaces. I think progressive Protestant spaces in particular, or mainline denominations, struggle more with this. And even when we do have confession, in the liturgy, it's often a very broad confession that we kind of,
We've got to cover what everyone's doing and not doing.
Yeah. And by doing so, don't really cover anything in particular. Or we give people, the 5 seconds to think about what happened last week, which is not enough time.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about it to each other.
Yeah. And it kind of gets away from that notion of practice.
Yeah.
That, yes, we might do it in liturgy on Sunday, but that there's a relational practice of the way that we're constantly interacting with each other, not just our invisible God, which it's fine that's God is invisible, but it can end up in practice becoming just this, it keeps landing back on me. It keeps landing back on my failure, and there isn't this something else that I can see and feel that is helping share this burden.
Yeah, it's being able to see the face of God in your community. I think that's super powerful. And to be clear, right, there are more healthier and less healthy ways to practice that. Right? I know, lots of churches that will make someone stand up and confess their sin to the whole church.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no.
Like, this has to be a mutual practice of sharing what's going on.
Yeah, and by that same token, a place that is safe to do so.
Yeah.
Where the goal is, how do we help you receive God's grace?
Yeah.
And ours. How do we help you receive God's love?
Yeah.
Not how do we decide what kind of punishment you need to have?
Yeah, or if you're going to be on leadership or not, or these things. Yeah.
No, and I have also been in those services where, and oddly enough, they were always only sexual related.
Oh, yeah.
I've always wondered at that. I'm like, is nobody in this church cheating on their taxes?
No.
Is no one in and they were never, and if they were about addiction, they were always far in the past.
Yeah.
They were not in the present.
Yeah.
And I thought, is this the only sin that we have?
Yeah.
Or the only one that we care about?
And then you have, I don't know how many people sitting in that congregation dealing with the same things, feeling tremendous shame and thinking, I can never say what's going on with me.
Yes. So it does the opposite of what you're saying when we create hospitality by sharing our own vulnerability.
Yeah.
Are there any other practices that you find that are really helpful to do in the sanctuary? And I realize it's maybe considered a more formal space, but what are some other ways like that we might make that mirror the practice of the basement a little bit more?
I think one of the things, I actually don't write about this, but one of the things that we do in the basement a lot is we'll read, so there's usually like a main text, right? So we'll read the AA Big Book or the NA Big Book, whatever it is. And we'll read a passage together, and then everyone will kind of talk about how that resonates with them and what they see in that passage. And I know some churches that do this, but I think this is a really interesting practice together of like really reading a text together and seeing how it lands for you and what you have experienced. I think that's a really useful way of like living faith together.
I love that because when you have it, and maybe it's because I love texts. This is what I do.
Hmm.
But a text to me is like that creates an equal playing field and equal entry
Yeah.
points because we all have this text and we're all reading it and we all are coming to it at equal advantages.
Yeah.
Whereas in life, even with our own experiences, we don't do that
No.
or we can't do that.
Yeah.
But a text is a place where if we're all reading it and reading it together, we all have equal access. And I love that one of the maybe antidotes to this kind of distance between us as Christians and as worshipers is learning together.
Yeah.
That actually just coming together and being like, what do we learn? Yes, what do we resonate with? But all coming out having received something. I think that experience is like
Yeah.
the perfect antidote.
And we might not agree, and that's a great thing too. I mean, anyone who knows the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous knows like there's a lot of there's a chapter called "To the Wives," for instance. Like there's some stuff that's, that's troubling, and it's interesting to hear people respond to that, right?
Yeah.
We don't all have to agree on what it means or what it says or how it lands. So I mean, I think that's a great practice. I think the other thing that 12-step communities tend to do really well is just spend time together. So for a long time, I was a student, so I had time for this. I would go to a meeting and every day and go to lunch with these people every day. And so I built some friendships that I still have. That to this day, there are some people I still meet with on a weekly basis to talk to about what's going on in my life. And so, really building those deep connections and recognizing it can't all happen in this 1 hour
Mhm.
meeting. It has to spill out into other spaces.
I read somewhere that the the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection.
Yeah,
That we have to look at not why the addictions actually make sense. The question is why the pain?
yeah,
And that the process, whether we're in a 12-step program or we're people, just regular old broken people
yeah,
in the
yeah,
church, that really what we need and what God has provided in a community of faith is connection.
yeah.
And that's
Yeah, because even people who use in like parties or use with a lot of other people, there aren't, by the time you get into deeper addiction, most people are not hanging out with other people too much. They're kind of doing it in isolation. But even for people who are doing it with other people, there is still a deep isolation because you're not really there with the other person.
yeah.
And so building connection, I think, and connection is how we figure out like, oh, this is not just happening to me. I'm not the only person who has these thoughts or who's doing these things. It really helps reduce shame, I think, when we talk to each other and realize, oh, these are pretty normal human things we're all dealing with.
Well, I think that's exactly what your book does. That
Oh, I'm
it
glad.
is a way of communicating that to people, that it in itself is this act of hospitality.
Oh, thank you.
So I appreciate you sharing it with us. I know it's going to go into the world and create a lot of healing. And for those of you watching, we will drop a link to the book in the show notes. So be sure to look for that. But Jen, unbelievably blessed. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.